Hi everyone, my name is Gabriel and this is the Hour of the Raven, your channel for everything Ravenloft, RPG, Dungeons and Dragons, and horror.
Today, we will uncover the history of Markovia, a desolate, dangerous, wild, and isolated region that resists the advances of civilization. Before we begin, a few clarifications. Today, we will explore the domain of Markovia, and we will expand our reference sources to address this domain. Our exploration through the mists in the core domains of Ravenloft generally cover domains that had already been featured in novels, adventures, and especially in the Ravenloft Gazetteers, books that provide detailed information about the domain and their Dark Lords. Up until now, I have been careful to present Ravenloft in my videos using official sources. However, in the case of Markovia and other domains not previously covered by the Ravenloft Gazetteers, I intend to expand on these sources of information. The domain of Markovia first appeared on the map of the Black Box, the Ravenloft Realm of Terror from 1919, but was drastically transformed by the events of the Grand Conjunction, which removed the domain from the Ravenloft core and inserted it into the Sea of Sorrows. After this drastic transformation, it was explored further in the events of the adventure Neither Man Nor Beast, and received some mentions in the Domains of Dread supplement and in the 3rd edition Ravenloft campaign setting. The domain would be covered in one of the 3rd edition Gazetteers, focused on the domains of the Sea of Sorrows, but unfortunately, White Wolf's license to release books for the setting came to an end, and these books were not written. The Ravenloft fan community wouldn't let the setting rot in oblivion. The Fraternity of Shadows website, the most well-known and organized sites for fans of the setting, has published netbooks that continue the Gazetteer's proposal, exploring in depth the domains of dread. Some of these books explore the Nocturnal Sea, the domain of Soaring, or the cluster of Zerisha, for example, and for some time now they are developing a gazetteer for the Sea of Sorrows. Although the Sea of Sorrows gazetteer is not yet finalized, some of its passages describing domains have already been previewed by their authors in Court of the Raven netbooks. In the video description, I will leave the link where you can download it. The next videos about Markovia will be based on the official material and the article about Markovia, written by Michel Adamis. The article on Markovia was published as a preview of the Sea of Sorrows Gazetteer, and it's possible that the final text will change when the Gazetteer is finally published. Are you ready? In our attempt to return to the mainland, we are abandoned in a small boat and shipwrecked on the remote island of Markovia. Seeking food and shelter, we move away from the beach and venture into the jungle that surrounds us. In the midst of our exploration, we see a smoke signal near nightfall, and we approach a large hut surrounded by wooden palisades. As we observe the place, we are soon surrounded by humanoid and bestial figures, who seem to see clearly in the moonless night. We try to reason with the beastman when a massive figure approaches. Wearing loose clothing and a straw hat, the figure watches us for a while, as if deciding what to do with us, until his face relaxes, and he welcomes us. Our host introduces himself as Dr. František Markov, a scientist and researcher who has settled on the island to investigate the cause of the strange curse that transforms men into beasts in this region. Polite and hospitable, he invites us to dinner at his residence and shares a little more about the curious history of Markovia.
Hour of the Raven.
Markovia is a wild and isolated region where no attempts at colonization have been successful. Studying its history is a challenge, since almost no written records or reliable accounts can be found about its past. Perhaps some clue to its mysterious past can be associated with its name, which bears the surname of an old and traditional Barovian family. The Markov family is a traditional aristocratic family of Barovia and Borca, and their names appear in numerous ancient records. Many of its members were present at the tragic wedding of Sergei Zarovich and Tatiana Fedorovna, and died in this tragic and treacherous attack that claimed the lives of almost all the guests present at the event. Perhaps the most famous of its members was Aurica Markovia, a priestess of the Andral faith, who because of her purity and goodness was considered a saint, and evil creatures could not even touch her. Despite the miracles attributed to Saint Markovia, she mysteriously disappeared, consumed by the darkness she swore to fight. Over time, Saint Markovia became a legend among the population. Could this region have been named by their discoveries in honor of Saint Aurica Markovia? This theory is unlikely. Over the centuries, the name and history of Saint Markovia gradually fell into oblivion, just as the religion of Andral was forgotten by the population during the dark years of Barovia's isolation in the mists. A similar fate befell the Markov family. The death or disappearance of its most prominent members, and the isolation by the mists, marking the beginning of their decline in influence and wealth. Many of the surviving family members settled on the outskirts of the city of Viaki, living from agriculture and livestock. While Saint Markovia was known for her acts of grace and kindness, other members of the family bear the taint of tragedy, madness, and evil. In one of the most brutal crimes committed in Barovia, one of the family members, a butcher, was accused of brutally murdering his wife and conducting bizarre and cruel surgical experiments, mixing animal parts and his wife's body in a monstrous aberration. The discovery of the crime led a maddened mob to pursue this murderer, and this infamous Markov fled to the misty border to escape his pursuers. Historical records reveal that in the year 689 of the Barovian calendar, the mist lifted north of Barovia to reveal the mountainous region that became known as Markovia. Perhaps the name of these lands was given by explorers and hunters of the mob, who believed that the infamous assassin Markov had escaped to take refuge in the mountains of this uninhabited land. The discovery of the uninhabited region of Markovia attracted the interest of explorers and traders. Although all signs pointed to a land untouched by civilization, some Begovist traders in Nova Vaza saw an opportunity to create a route to the west, exempt from the taxes demanded by their prince. Other explorers imagined that the mountains of Markovia must also be full of silver and other valuable minerals, like the other mountains of the Balinots. Others saw this desolation as an opportunity for a new life, escaping the yoke of Count Strahd, the hunger of Gehenna, or other horrors of the mists. Regardless of the reason these settlers attempted to explore or settle in Markovia, a sinister fate awaited them. Many disappeared without a trace, leaving behind the ruins of their villages, mines, and camps. Others reported horrific encounters with aberrant creatures that were neither man nor beasts, but twisted amalgams of human and beastly parts. Soon, these mountainous and abandoned lands became occupied by territories of the savage beastmen, primitive creatures with few traces of civilization, and who seemed to follow with religious devotion the mysterious figure of Diosenblad, the master of pain. For a time, these creatures, remained in the limits of the remote lands of Markovia, but sinister reports began to tell about incursions of groups of beastmen into other lands. One of such reports involved an incursion of these creatures into Nova Vaza, where the beastmen searched, invaded and desecrated the tomb of an ancient king, taking with them a powerful artifact, the Table of Life. These creatures intended to take this artifact to Markovia, but were attacked and robbed by thieves near the border. The artifact followed a tortuous path, with the thieves being tricked and stolen by traveling Vistanis, who then again lost the Table of Life to thieves, until a band of knights defeated the thieves and reclaimed the artifact. Among these noble knights was a member of the mysterious Order of the Guardians, a secret organization dedicated to destroying or hiding dangerous and evil artifacts. Driven by his monastic calling, he swore to guard the artifact, and he took and hid it in the mountains of Markovia, where he founded the Monastery of Lost Souls at the slopes of Mount Baratak. This was perhaps one of the only successful attempts at colonization that established itself and prospered in this wild land, perhaps due to its inaccessibility at the altitude or the secret of its monastic existence. The remote and isolated aspect of Markovia proved perfect for this type of monastic seclusion, and the success of the Monastery of Lost Souls led to the founding of another monastery by the Order of the Guardians. Another cell of the Order of the Guardians was responsible for guarding the dangerous Tapestry of Dark Souls, an artifact created in the Nightmare Lands that could imprison the soul of evil beings, but also of exerting a corrupting influence. The discovery of this artifact brought the covetousness of evil forces, and the necromancer Morgoth attempted to take the tapestry and free the evil souls that were imprisoned within. His attempt was thwarted by the Guardians, who imprisoned him in the tapestry, but his attack decimated the monastic order, leaving only 3 survivors. These remaining monks then decided to move the headquarters of their cell to the remote and wild lands of Markovia, recently unveiled by the mists, in the hope of keeping the dangerous Tapestry of Dark Souls protected and hidden. This new monastery was not enough to contain the darkness that was imprisoned within the Tapestry of Dark Souls. Even imprisoned, Morgoth corrupted and influenced those around him so that he could be free of the tapestry. Once he escaped, he gathered forces of darkness and led an attack of undead and other creatures of the night against the monastery. Tragedy befell this monastery, and there is no longer any record of the Tapestry of Dark Souls, the terrible Morgoth, or the monks who protect it. Today, only the ruins of this monastery can be found in Markovia. Perhaps the most relevant event in Markovia's recent history is its disappearance into the mists during the Grand Conjunction in 740 of the Barovian calendar. During this cataclysmic event, where the mists swallowed the world, Markovia disappeared amidst earthquakes, leaving behind only a vast crater, which became known as the Shadow Rift. While many pondered the fate of the lands of Markovia and Gehenna, the beastmen of Markovia discovered that their cold mountains were now surrounded by the Sea of Sorrows, cut from the world and immersed in a tropical climate. The years that followed were of total isolation, but also of rapid transformation, as the island fauna and flora were invaded and transformed by other species, and its inhabitants fought for survival. The island did not remain hidden for long, for in 742 of the Barovian calendar, a Lamorian captain discovered the island while exploring the Sea of Sorrows. Even so, the island remained practically inaccessible. In addition to being surrounded by reefs and corals that were difficult to navigate, its main navigable way was guarded by a terrible sea monster, the Kraken of Souls, which destroyed approaching vessels and contributed to the isolation of Markovia. The isolation of this island would not last forever, however. In 744 of the Barovian calendar, the Lamordian ship of the Howling Walrus, captained by Leonard Gardner, managed not only to map its coast, but also to find a safe way to anchor on its shore. Captain Leonard returned to Londendorf with exotic fruits and animals, and bringing the news that this gigantic tropical island was the lost lands of Markovia, which once lay in the center of the continent. The rediscovery of Markovia sparked economic and scientific interest in Lamordia, and Baron Wilhelm von Albecker ordered expeditions to try to establish a colony on the island. In 748, the ship Stellaris set sail from Lamordia, carrying a group of colonists and soldiers to settle in the region. The ship successfully reached the island, and they took advantage of an abandoned village in ruins to establish their camp. Despite fortifying the village to defend against attacks by beastmen, the population was quickly being decimated by tropical diseases. Some returned to the ship and set out for Lamordia in search of more supplies and reinforcements, but tragedy struck them in the Sea of Sorrows, and they never reached their destination. The settlers who remained also disappeared, victims of disease, beastmen, or even more sinister fates. In 749, another ship attempted to reach the island, the Sunset Empires, but was destroyed by the sea monster, the Soul Kraken. Some of its crew managed to survive and swim to the shore, and they would play a relevant role in the events that followed, which marked the outbreak of conflict between the beastman population and also with the monastery of the Order of Guardians. Until then, the beastmen were united under the leadership of the enigmatic Diosenblatt, the Master of Pain, but a dissent arose among them, and a rebellion was led by Akanga, a beastman made from parts of a lion. He openly questioned the belief that Diosenblatt was a divine entity and raided all the beastmen of the island to his cause, which resulted in a violent conflict. Also during this period, the Monastery of Lost Souls suffered a major setback. A group of shipwrecked adventurers on the island, survivors of the shipwreck of the Sunset Empires, were induced by rumors of the artifact of the Table of Life and managed to reach the monastery and steal the artifact from the monks. This theft of the artifact occurred during the beginning of the period of great conflict in the Akanga Rebellion, and in the chaos that followed, the whereabouts of the Table of Life and these adventurers became unknown. After this violence outbreak, the beastmen became even more divided and fragmented. Although the cult of Diosenblatt and the Akanga Rebellion still have power and followers, many of the beastmen have organized themselves into smaller groups, seeking survival in the jungle at any cost. This period has seen its half-man, half-beast population regress to even more primitive behaviors. Recently, however, a new vessel has been frequently landing in Markovia, and has even established a way to explore the island. The ship Howling Walrus, captained by Leonard Gardner, returned to the island once more, and venturing inland, encountered the scientist and resident Dr. František Markov. František lives in isolation on the island, in a large hut in the jungle, and lives in community as the leader of a few loyal beastmen, having managed to establish and survive on the island due to his scientific interests. Dr. Markov and Captain Leonard soon reached an adventurous agreement to the exploration of the island. Having knowledge of a vein of silver in the mountains, František would command some of the beastmen to help extract this mineral and would supply it to the Lamorian captain's expedition, in exchange for a share of the profits and supplies and materials for his scientific research. Perhaps with this agreement, the years of isolation and primitive life on this island may be finally coming to an end, marking the beginning of a new era for Markovia. Inside Dr. František Markov's hut, we find rest and nourishment in a well-served dinner. Our host and his beastmen servants are rustic, but they made a great effort to make us feel at ease. During dinner, he shared with us details of the island's curious history, but we can't help but feel that he also seemed to be evaluating us, as if he were deciding about our future. After asking a few questions about our pasts and understanding our capabilities, he finally seems to decide and make us a proposal. František states that his purpose on the island is to study and try to reverse the terrible curse that seems to transform men into animal-like creatures, and he believes that to do so, it would be essential to find the mythical artifact of the Table of Life. Only this artifact will allow him to operate on the beastmen safely in an attempt to reverse their terrible condition. Although the whereabouts of this artifact are still unknown after the conflicts of the Akanga rebellion, he believes that the monks of the Monastery of Lost Soul may have recovered the artifact, or at least discovered evidence of its location. Dr. František's proposal is simple. If we venture into the monastery and find any clues about the whereabouts of the Table of Souls, he could speak to his ally, Captain Leonard, who would be arriving with his ships in the next few days, to grant us passage back to the mainland, to Lamordia. Fearing that no other ship would approach this remote island, we found ourselves with no choice but to accept this absurd proposal, and began our journey the following morning to the remote monastery of Lost Soul. We made our way to the jungle under Dr. Markov's instructions, avoiding the greatest dangers along the way. After days of walking and exploring, we reached the foot of the steep mountain where a precarious rope-operating lifting mechanism stood at the edge of the rocky cliff. Pulling the rope from a distant bell, we waited for a long time, fearing that we would have to climb or find an ascending path. Suddenly, the wooden platform begins to rise slowly. After a nerve-wracking and slow climb, we finally reach the top and find a monastery, apparently in ruins. In its central courtyard, however, a single monk, covered in robes, awaits us. We awkwardly introduce ourselves, saying that we are lost on the island, and seek shelter and information on how to escape this place. The monk remains covered in the darkness of his robes, and says nothing in response, but he gestures and guides us into the monastery, which is in complete darkness. In silence, he leads us to bedrooms and leaves us without saying a word. This absurd situation leaves us frightened and anxious to leave this place, and we escape our rooms to search for clues. Exploring the empty corridors, we find a dusty library where several tomes and scrolls are stored. On a table, an open tome appears to be the monk's last work, an account of the island of Markovia and its most sinister secrets. Join us, subscribe to the channel, and activate notifications, and let's explore the sinister secrets of Markovia.